won't blunder. No, we're too senior to blunder.
I'd like to think so, but life has taught me that things are not always like that.
Yeah. So I am somebody who is fascinated by Latvia, by Latvian music, and by the diners. I first encountered them when I went to Ventspils, really, for staying at the Writers and Translators House, working on another project. But I just fell in love with these beautiful verses about nature and about the seasons and about the gods as well. It was the first time I encountered really the Latvian ideas of paganism in depth when I was in Ventspils. I started to dig into it. I had a little idea before I went, but only a little one. And I loved it, especially the sun goddess. And that's what just given me a long-term interest in the diners. Let's start off with actually, we should start off by introducing you, shouldn't we, Raimonds? Let's do that. So you're an expert in the diners because you've been singing them. You're a lifelong expert, somebody who's sung them all your life.
I've never considered myself an expert. I've considered myself somebody who's got an interest in it and has picked up a lot of things on the way.
Well, an enthusiast and a practicing enthusiast. That's what's so amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, the diners basically are little 4-line verses, and they cover basically everything from birth to the grave. It also covers all the seasonal festivals, whether it be Christmas, midsummer. I mean, midsummer alone, there's 2,500 just about that folk songs about the midsummer. They were collected in the 19th century by somebody called Christians Barons, and his cupboard that he created to store all these little verses, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of them. We're not talking a few little pieces of paper. There's hundreds of thousands of them. Is actually a part of the UNESCO heritage now because it is deemed as so important. And one of the things that most people don't seem to realize about the diners, apart from them being brilliant little 4 lines that express everything and express it in such a way, a lot of it might seem alien to us because we don't really live the lives like the people used to do. But the symbolism and the meaning of the words, people in those days understood. And basically, it covers everything. And if you want to know about the culture and the life and the mentality of a Latvian, there's no better place to start than in the diners. And pretty much you could also say that is more purer Latvian than what you get to see nowadays in Latvia.
Yes, I was fascinated when I started to read them and sing them. Just obviously, I only encountered a few, but certain motifs would come up time and time again. And the first time I saw them, like Kumalinu, and like, you know, all these horses going around being given as gifts, and people with their wreaths and crowns and on their head, and this kind of ritual life that was being
horses is, I suppose, is, yeah. I mean, horses nowadays seem defunct, but basically it's like having a Merc or a BMW now. It was a very valuable possession, and it wasn't just the fact that it was a horse and you could go riding on it. It was a farm animal. It was an animal used in wars. It was used to transport. It basically was the main animal, was the main thing, and it was no different really in anywhere else. But it's just they can go back for thousands of years, because at the end of the day, they'd always been an integral part in the agrarian society. And there is lots of other things, like you say, the crowns at midsummer. The symbolisms there is that basically normally a crown's only worn by a maiden rather than a married woman, but on midsummer everybody can forget that. They can all wear a crown, and so there is lots of little symbolisms like that all the way through. The other big danger with them is that if you try and translate them, Yeah, with the English language, you could sort of come unstuck. I personally have not really, there is some translation, but I've never really come across, I've never tried it because I just cannot get my head around how to do it in English. And I'm not a poet, so maybe somebody will get their head around it properly one day. But it's also using certain words. The word white in Latvian means noble, means good, means pure. But if you translate it like my white mother, and in English, it has different connotations straight away. People could say, well, that's a racist thing. Why white? Why, you know, why not my black mother? But if you say black mother, it has a totally different meaning in ancient Latvian culture. And all colors have a set meaning. And it's like different animals, when they're used, they have a different meaning. So some animals, let's say birds, this like, what can I think of? Trying to think what crowd is. No, it's not a swallow. Oh, just a minute. Gone blank. Just let me find out what a crowclis is.
Yeah.
A crow. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That has two meanings. It can be bad, but it can also be positive depending when it's being used. Whereas a skylark, for instance, is a bright, happy sort of bird. So the people knew if that, depending on what animal was used, what sort of message was trying to be conveyed. And it was the same with the colours. And numbers also. Latvians, for instance, in all the diners, you don't find anything that has the word null, 0, because it didn't exist in old Latvian times. And the numbers have a set sort of meaning. You know, number 2 has a certain meaning compared to number 9, which is like a sacred sort of number. So nowadays, a lot of the things sound obsolete, but for the ancient Latvians, they were of some significance.
Yeah, I mean, as a student of literature, I see a lot of things in the diners that relate to pagan traditions that poke through medieval English literature, which is something I came across a lot earlier. But you recognize some of these type of, yes, symbolic and also magical meanings that come from stuff like numbers, or maybe things in nature, like I'm actually thinking of things that are more Christian at the moment, because obviously medieval Christianity, there was Christianity everywhere, like the Virgin Mary in flowers and that kind of thing, which obviously the Latvian work that we're talking about, although there might be a bit of Christianity seeping in,
the Christianity comes through a lot later. A lot of the diners you can actually date by what they're on it. One of the finest examples is the war songs. You can date them sort of like pre the German first incursion in the 12th century, and you can date all the wars by the type of weapons and the things that they're saying. And you can go all the way through the centuries, and you can basically almost, not to the year, but to the period, date them where they are. And the Christian church, obviously, Latvia and Lithuania were the last pagan nations in Europe. They became Christian a lot later than others. And a lot of both Latvia and Lithuania there was a lot of them who kept the pagan religion. They would not do it at home because it was basically not allowed. They'd get punished. So they'd go deep into the woods, and these sacred groves were very, very important to them. But it would only be a close group of people who would, family or whoever would go, because obviously they didn't want the Lord and Master to do it, otherwise they knew they would get punished. And a lot of the Christian things were put on top of the old pagan things. A guy who done some research into the diners that relate to the burial process, he reckons that there is quite a bit hefty chunk of them actually date that back to the late Neolithic period, which is a few thousand years ago. And the only reason is because they can tie it together. When you read them as such, you don't really get the picture, but then when you put it together with the archaeological evidence, it all makes absolute perfect sense. And some of those words have gone from the sort of pagan and the archaic into the Christian church that they use for the cemeteries and so on. So yeah, there is a way of going back and checking. There's people who are far more clever than me, so ethno-linguists and everything. They are able to pinpoint literally from the era they do. There's another piece of work done by somebody called Palliaps. He did it in can't remember which university in America, but he looked at the origins of the Baltic and Vedic languages. And again, people always think that the Vedas from India are older and whatever. He actually proves that that is not the case, because one of the flaws is when the Indo-European tribes sort of split up and went different ways, they'd always assumed one way, but actually he's proven that no, there's other ways that they could have got to India. And that's why it's not surprising that old Sanskrit's got a lot of words that tie in with Latvian and Lithuanian. So yeah, they are archaic. There's a lot of very old ones. Equally, there's a lot of very modern ones, which you can more or less read straight through. You know that they were made up in like only 200 years ago. And when they're tied in with the folk song, the structure of the song gives it away as well. There's a Latvian folk song called Eskarai Aiziedams, and it's a very melodic song. But because they talk about having to serve in the army for 25 years, you know it's got to be after 1721, when Latvia was basically became a part of the Russian Empire, with the peace treaty that was Northern Peace Treaty that was signed with Peter the Great. So, and they had to go and serve 25 years. So it's a lovely song, but it's not as old as some of the other war songs that date back centuries before that.
It's such an interesting thing to learn when you start to encounter these groups of the diners and you put them together. I mean, some are very similar to others in terms of the melody collected or the verses. But when you're when you look at a group, you can really get a feel for lots of different aspects of life, like you say. I was really interested in what you said about the burial ones, because I haven't come across those ones very much. And yet ancient burial is one of the places where we do get a lot of information about archaeology. And when you look at the Latvian landscape, you can see so many hill forts in the landscape, partly perhaps because it's quite flat land. So they really stick out literally. But they're so beautiful. I've always been fascinated, like many people, by just the shape of a hill fort with the trees and the curve of the land. It seems to stimulate something very deep in the human psyche, for me anyway, when I look at them. And Latvia is very beautiful in terms of the surviving hill forts.
I mean, when I recently went up to the Orkneys, and there's quite a lot of cairns up there, the burial mounds, and it just sort of made me realize that although they're a different structure to the ones that were in Latvia, the basic principle was the same. Whereas in Latvia, they put bodies and then they put some sand and then the next one, and so it got built up over time like that. It just sort of made me think how it must have been, seeing those up there, because Nordic countries, a lot of the things seem to be very similar yet very different.
There's enough differences, but it's lovely when you look through and see the similarities and think about start to look at archaeology and you go back. I mean, it does make the mind boggle, and that was one of my first real interests in the diners in particular, was coming across the sun goddess, which absolutely blew my mind, because I'd been brought up with that Greek and beyond, I suppose, into the what region would it be, Anatolia. The idea of Apollo, the sun god, was like obvious, that the kind of idea I grew up with, it's obvious it's the sun god. I don't know why, but apparently it kind of was. And then, oh look, there's a sun goddess. That's really interesting, because suddenly you realize, oh, maybe things were different. And I have heard some archaeologists, or some speculative archaeologists, talk about the period of the Stonehenge and the other stone circles being part of a religion that was over a great amount of physical area, but which the same religion, because the or a similar religion, because
Yeah.
because of the stone circles being appearing in different locations, and that being a sun goddess religion.
Yeah. I mean, it is so different because in Latvian folklore and mythology, the sun is omnipresent. It whereas in a lot of different countries the sun can be very harsh and so on. With her being a she, the whole context, she's looked like, because in Latvia, although it does get warm, it doesn't get crazy hot like in, I don't know, Turkey or the Sahara Desert or whatever. So they look at her like a mother or a godmother, and the attitude and the way that the view it all is totally different from all the hot countries. And obviously the opposite of that is the moon, and that he is masculine, but he was also you find that the moon is mentioned in a lot of the warrior songs, because he was the masculine side of it all. And also in the mythology there's I don't know how many songs, but there's a lot of songs about the celestial wedding, and between the daughters of the sun and the moon and the morning star and the sons of the gods and so on, and they take up they're very poetic, and they are probably quite archaic, but again, we only can guess at roughly what they mean. We don't really know for definite. We know vaguely what's happened. There is no definitive answer because so many of the songs are so different, and very often there's just fragments rather than the whole bit. Because in Latvian mythology, there's no heroic person or anything like that. It's all in it together. Thunder is Perkorns. He creates rain, thunder and that. So they've got a different place in the whole pantheon of Latvian mythology than they have, for instance, in the Mediterranean area. It's just so different.
Yeah, you don't get that kind of thing that we are so used to from being classically educated, that idea of the different characters of the gods all reacting, and then obviously Zeus is off there causing lots of trouble, Zeus or Jupiter having lots of flings, raping various women. There's all and everybody's got these personalities, they're all reacting with each other. We're a bit in a way like some of the other pantheons across the world, but in the Latvian tradition that I've come across in the diners, it's all a bit more, as you say, generic. It's almost more, it's not so much that there's so much personalities, although you get a bit of that happening, but it's more like they're stars themselves, just sort of eternal cosmic principles that are there and sort of look over the world, a bit like the stars whirling around. Like powers that are with us. I'm always interested by Lima because she's the goddess that gives out fate in a lot of representations. She's there at the bathhouse at the birth and gives people their individual fate lines. But again, it's not she's interacting with other gods and sort of struggling with them, but they've
all got their own set place, and everything is sort of just like, I suppose that is the only similarity I can think with Greek mythology, because I when I studied my history degree, we had a 1 year where we did about Greek mythology, and a lot of the things that happened to the gods was a reflection of basically what happened on earth. It's sort of a mirror image. Now in Latvian mythology it is slightly different, but again they all have a set job to do, just like on a farmstead everybody has the set jobs to do. And I don't think it was because they were a chauvinistic society or anything like that. It was just a physical attribute. To go and chop a tree was more of a man thing than a woman thing. But women ground the corn, and it wasn't the older women, it was the younger girls who had to do it. And again, it's a physically hard job, but once it gets into it and you get the stone moving, it's not that heavy, but it is a job that needs doing. And so everybody had their job, and they just basically did their jobs in the farmstead. It wasn't a case of, you're a woman, you can't do this. It was just basically, it was accepted.
Yeah. Well, I remember
That's all.
them grinding the corn at the beginning of Poot Virginie, the film. Probably
Both way,
pronounced it wrong. Is it? Yeah. But I love that film because I love the music to it.
Yeah.
It's very beautifully presented. And
Yeah.
I think it's based on the title's based on a diner, I think. But they're grinding the corn at the beginning, the young women as the men approach the village to look for their brides.
Yeah. I mean, that's again in the when you look through the diners which referred about the wedding process, one of the big things was that they always had to watch the younger sister who was doing the grinding to make sure that nobody was going to come and kidnap her and take her off to be married. And that's a recurring theme in a lot of those songs.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of bride stealing is a big sort of theme, isn't it, of not necessarily only of the diners, but through sort of stories of culture. And there's two angles, I suppose, I always think of. You partly have the idea that people are in real danger, like young women are in real danger of being kidnapped and taken away before they're ready to go. And then also you might have the idea also that people are eloping because there is the wish to elope as well.
To get away from the drudgery of whatever, that they might find it a drudgery where they are, and they're hoping to go somewhere else where it's the old thing, isn't it? The grass is greener on the other side.
And also young people fall in love, don't they? And run off together, don't they? So
they do these things.
Yeah. But I'm so fascinated by the diners. Let's have a little talk about your work that you've done with it in the UK. I think that's really interesting.
Well, basically, going back a long time ago, to be exact, probably my first sort of encounters with it was with my dad. When we used to go anywhere in the car, we would all sing these songs. As a kid, I didn't really have a clue. We'd all pick a song and we'd just sing it, and I suppose that was basic. Then to make sure that I learnt Latvian, he shipped me off with my brothers to a school in Germany, which was the only Latvian grammar school in the free world, which was funded by the Germans. So I went there, and that's how I basically learnt Latvian. But also the Latvian traditions and the folk songs was a big part of it as well. And when I came back to the UK, we formed a group. It lasted for 10 years, but that was purely more of a musical group rather than singing group. And then 1983, my brother and this older gentleman, we started thinking, well, we ought to make all these weird and wonderful instruments that the Latvians used to have. And again, a lot of the information that we got about them came actually from the folk songs themselves, where you could sort of get a rough idea what they should be, and then coupled together with pictures from museums, we managed to make the array of instruments that we needed at the time. But it also made us we decided to start singing. And because we started to sing, we decided to make everything that we do seasonal. So we would celebrate the coming of spring at Meten. We would celebrate Easter, but not Easter as we understand in the Christian thing. It was more about the spring equinox. We would celebrate the coming of summer, which would be at the beginning of May, which I suppose the nearest thing is like Beltane, but Latvians, it was a thing called Ursin. But that got shifted by the Christian faith when they put St. George on, and it was pulled back 2 weeks earlier to the 23rd. But the original Latvian one would be around the 5th of May. Then there was Midsummer. Yeah.
Maybe we should play something, by the way, on the show. I wanted a song to celebrate this time of year. Yeah.
You say you've got one, yeah?
No, no. Pick one for me, and we'll play it.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll send you those. That's no problem. Then we did Midsummer, and basically it went through all the festivals right through to Christmas and that. And we started to realize that by actually singing the songs at the relevant time of year, it tied in with the weather and everything else that we were doing. I mean, I know the climate in the UK isn't quite the same, well, especially in England, the same as Latvia. Maybe if I lived in Scotland, there'd be more of a similarity. But nonetheless, it just seemed to be the right thing to do. And then coupled with that, we knew about the christenings, or the name giving ceremony as we call them, the weddings and funerals. And again, we did those all based on folk songs because there's such a wealth of them. I mean, just give you an idea, you've seen the diner books, haven't you? Well, there's books like this which are just purely like wedding songs. There's a book like this which has just got wedding and children and christening and funeral songs. So there is material there. And I know you did the Party Diddish, you did a Party song, didn't you?
Yes,
Recently.
Yeah, recently. Yeah.
Well, we did the dance for our children, Party Diddish, and we've done it for so many other children. We did it for my grandson when he was born 2019. So it's something that's become a way of life as well. We've had the old tradition weddings as well. I mean, when my daughter got married, we had the groom's house at one place and the bride's house at another, and we split the group in half because the poor guy is English, so he obviously had no chance of singing all this, but he agreed to go along with it. He thought it's great. And so he came to get his bride and went through all the battering and everything, but it's all done with folk songs. And then we've done, obviously, the people in the group at the beginning were people who were born when Latvia was an independent country, so a lot of them have passed away now. But we did their funerals in the old traditional side with the old traditional songs rather than the Christians, because they actually wanted us to do it for them like that. So it's become partly a performance thing, but partly it has become a way of life as well. Insofar, it's not that straightforward living in the UK to do it, because the dates, for instance, if you're working, don't always make it easy and so on. But as a rule, we've been able to do it now for 40 years. How much longer we'll carry on, I don't know. I like to think we'll carry on for quite a bit yet.
Yeah, I think forever. I mean, all these Latvian diners, they've lasted long enough. So, no one's managed to, well, they're still here.
Yeah. Despite one, whether it be the Germans, the Poles, the Swedes, the Russians. And I remember a conversation when I was in Ireland once, and they were asking me what language I was talking with the person. I said, we're talking Latvian. And
hang on a minute, my husband's singing. Matthew, I'm doing a Zoom. I can hear you singing he's singing to the dog.
Was he practicing from his album? And he said, well, we've sort of got talking, and I said, big crying shame is that the Irish haven't got they've got a language and they don't use it. And he says, it's difficult. I says, well, I'll give you two examples. Israel was a state founded that didn't have its language, and they created it and they use it all the time. I says, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia were occupied longer than Ireland was occupied by the English, and they've managed to retain it and use it. And I said, unless the people at the top start using it, the people at the bottom won't see any use for it. So I think the resistance that the Latvians and Lithuanians and Estonians had against the Russification is remarkable, that they've actually kept the language and the culture alive as well as they have.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I have a lot of Russian friends who also are in Latvia and Estonia, and some of them are very positive about being, speaking Estonian, Latvian, and other people are not so positive. And so you can see how Latvian and Lithuania and Estonia have had to be very assertive to continue that cultural language, because there is a lot of opposition to it than there was in the Russification. Definitely, I can feel it now, even in people I know. So
at the end of the day, any language is good, you know. And I know there's a lot of Russians who seem to think that Latvians are a waste of time, but I know there's a lot of Russians who speak damn sight better Latvian than I do, you know. And I think it's all about mental state, what you want to do. And this argument that that some of them use, it's no good is Latvian and this, but it's a language, and then any language has got to be good for the brain. And I mean, I speak English, I speak Latvian, I speak German, and I'm still wanting to learn another language, you know. So I don't think there's any problem with it. And the interesting
I love
thing,
people singing languages. I have to say, I think I really love doing that myself, and I think it's a really good way for people to get a start in a language. It's not almost sometimes about speaking it, but if you're a singer, it's a wonderful thing to do to get a feeling and to just try and take it on. And everybody's going to be making mistakes. I mean, goodness me, I mean, well, my Latvian's really rubbish in terms of speaking, but you know, I can feel it, and I can feel the words, and as a poet and somebody who sings in it, in the language, or tries to, it's just do it, and it's
that's
a
right.
beautiful thing.
I mean, the interesting thing is, one of the ways I show to a lot of people that Latvian language is a lot older than they think is what I say to the Russians. It's like, why do the Russians call themselves Russian, and why do the English call them Russia, Germans Russland, or French Russie? Everybody calls them Rus, but why do the Latvians not call them Rus? Why do they call them Krivichi, Krievi? Because they came from a tribe, Krivichi, that was there before Russia even existed. The Rus didn't get into Latvia, so they went down and united the tribes that were there. And one of those 6 tribes that they united was the Krivichi, and they became a part of the Russian. So the name that the Latvian has is actually older than the name that Russians have themselves for their country.
It's so beautiful. Lots of the things that I found out about Latvia and the use of language and the old times, because you can see how important the names of trees are, for example. And when I was in Ventspils, I really enjoyed that actually the streets also were called like Birch Street and Sun Street and Moon Street and Pine Street. And I thought that's much nicer than having all these streets called after these sort of these people in history. And now we're starting to pull them down as slave traders, as we sort of dismantle.
Yeah, but I was just going to say, you get to the situation now, like in Liverpool, where and Bristol, where the streets named after these slave traders. And of course, nowadays it's not so appealing. At the time, it probably was. But if you're calling it after, like you say, a birch, a pine, it's not going to be offensive to anyone at any time, because they are trees that are all the way around them. So it just seems a natural thing to do.
Yeah, and I loved it, and it was kind of really eye-opening, because nowadays in the UK, the only places you get places called like Birch Street or Pine Street's probably in a new estate where they just chopped down a forest to put up a new housing development of places. But in Ventspils, main drag was Sun Street, and then Moon Street. We're going to run out of time in a minute, so I'll just boot it up again, because I don't think we've quite finished.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. Yeah,
excellent. So I'll just do what I have to do when it runs. I'll do it now because we're running out of time.
Okay.
Yeah.